Bobby O Show.
Welcome to another edition of the Bobby O Show. This is Bob O. Potsner, and as usual, I have what I think will be an interesting show for you today. I love to do topics that I know very little about because I get a chance to get educated in my pre-show prep with my expert and my guest, and also I get to learn a lot. And this is a show about a topic I know very little about. My guest will be Rick Lawrence, who you've seen in the past on shows I've done. When he talked about COVID, but today's show is not about COVID. It's about a topic known as artificial intelligence. And it's interesting because I can remember many years ago when a friend of mine, Ted Okon, who also appeared in the show, showed me about using the internet. And I said, internet? Who needs the internet? And of course, now we can't live without the internet. Internet has a lot of great features, but it also has some problems as well. And we're going to talk about what I would consider to be like the next generation perhaps of the internet. And that's what Rick's going to talk to us about, educate us about generative AI, also known as a function of it called Chat GPT. Rick Lawrence, welcome aboard.
Hi, Bob. Well, congratulations on the new show. And as always, I'm honored to be on it.
Well, it's a pleasure having you on the show. Rick, tell us a little bit about your background so we can then delve into what AI is. How is it that you're someone who's so knowledgeable about AI, actually called generative AI?
So let me go all the way back to the beginning, interesting enough, which is where I first encountered AI. And that was when I was an undergrad at Stanford. I'm slightly embarrassed to admit that this is the year of my 50th class reunion. So I was reminiscing a bit. And indeed, I encountered a chatbot in the Stanford undergrad library. I'll comment more on that later because it's relevant to how these systems have evolved. My major should have been computer science at Stanford. It was chemical engineering. I sort of discovered that there were more exciting things than chemical engineering. I went on to get a PhD in nuclear engineering. And then that's what brought me to Schlumberger Dow Research here in Ridgefield, where I was a member of the nuclear science department. By the way, again, sort of keeping with the theme of AI, there was a group at Schlumberger, and this was in the early 1980s, that was doing what were called expert systems. Those were leading edge AI systems at the time, and we can come back to that as needed. I became very interested in large scale computing at Schlumberger, and I moved on to IBM Research, where I ended up heading a group that was doing large scale computing. And in the 1990s, we realized that, well, where computing was going was really sort of the beginnings of data science and really, computational AI, where we were using big computers against big data to find really interesting things. So, the group continued to evolve. I ended up being, before I left IBM in 2016, was running the machine learning organization within research. And then I moved to I ended up running a startup in New York City for 3 years, best 3 years of my life. Had a ton of fun, where we were applying machine learning, which is, we can talk more about what that means, but a subset of AI in a financial setting. So I've got sort of a background of having participated through a range of eras, if you like, of artificial intelligence. And then, as you alluded to, when the pandemic hit, I got interested in doing COVID data science. Hence, we met, and I was on the show several times, and I was applying, more routine data science there. But once, we've kind of, fortunately, COVID at least is mostly behind us, not completely. I moved on to thinking more about generative AI, and of course, ChatGPT came on, and I've ended up giving a couple of talks on that subject. Let's have a discussion here.
You have quite a diverse background getting to this area. It's interesting. Rick and I have discussed having probably 2 or 3 shows on this topic, and I view today's show as being the introductory show about artificial intelligence. When I was in college at Yale, we used to say there's a physics class that was called Physics for Poets, which was essentially a physics intro kind of class. And we're going to do this sort of that approach to this series of 3 shows. And today it's going to be AI for poets like myself. and that's to understand what is AI, how can we use it, and get into some of the risks to our society that have evolved both in the internet, which, as far as I'm concerned, is not nearly protective enough to our personal lives and personal privacy as it should be. And I think we need to perhaps learn from the internet things that should be applied to the generative AI materials, also Chat GPT. Rick, question number one is, what is the distinction between artificial intelligence pursuant to generative AI versus Chat GPT? How are they?
Okay, so a great place to start. So artificial intelligence, let's just talk about what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence is the theory and development of compute systems that solve tasks that normally require human intelligence. That's the simplest definition of AI. And that definition has been around for several decades now. Now, generative AI has recently, within the last few years, become part of our AI lexicon, if you like. And most specifically, it started being used when ChatGPT became available in November of last year. So generative AI means that the AI system is not only capable of understanding content, text, video, audio, etc., but is capable of generating it. And we'll show a couple of examples of that. So think of generative AI as a new phase of AI that allows these AI systems to ingest massive amounts of data and then generate content that is comparable to what humans would create.
Rick, if I were a betting man, should I bet on Kasparov, who was the person who played Bobby Fischer in a huge chess match years ago? Should I bet on him in a chess match or Chat GPT? What do you think?
You actually, ironically, you could probably bet on Kasparov simply because ChatGPT is not optimized to play chess. Chess, by the way, was one of the landmarks of AI when a chess system developed by IBM Research beat Kasparov. It's hard to believe, back in 1997, so approaching 3 decades ago.
So
but ChatGPT does a whole lot of things that the machine that beat Kasparov cannot do, for example.
I see, but there is a machine that has beaten Kasparov, correct?
Correct. In fact, now, I mean, any chess program that runs on a laptop can beat anybody right up to a grandmaster. In fact, grandmasters now use computer chess games to train against. So again, it's been dominantly an advance in computing and algorithms.
As a funny story, as an aside, when I went to Yale, I thought I was a pretty good chess player from Shelton High School. And so this guy was bragging how he was pretty good in chess. I said, well, let's play a game right now. And he said, no, I can't play you. I said, why not? He said, because I'm too good. I said, what do you mean you're too good? He said, I'll tell you what I will do. We kind of pushed him around. He said, I'll play you and your roommate, and I'll play blindfolded. So he's going to play my roommate and me, and he would play us blindfolded. Long story short is he beat us handily. So maybe the machine can't beat. His name was Gene Meyer, but I think it's a funny story about how we think that chess is such a hard game to play, and it's a very hard game to play. But the bottom line is that a machine can be made to beat the chess masters.
That's correct. And now subsequent machines, Watson from IBM, beat humans in Jeopardy, and a system from Google, DeepMind, a company acquired by Google, beat the best players in Go, which is a game that's order of magnitude more complex than chess. So you can see the progression here. By the way, interesting enough, there was a machine that beat a human in checkers back in 1956. The
real question for me is, could a machine beat me in Candyland? But in any event, that's a game we played as kids, if you'll remember. So tell me, please, getting back to generative AI, how is generative AI something that can be useful in a positive way to me as opposed to just the plain old internet? What's the distinction?
Yeah, so a lot of the discussion around AI now, increasingly, it seems to me, focuses on the downsides of AI for good reason, because there are a lot of concerns, and that's a much broader discussion. But some of the positive things about AI, two things that come to mind to me immediately is the use of AI in medical diagnoses. Very complex diagnoses require lots of expertise and lots of data. And certainly these systems are comparable, are beginning to become comparable to the best physicians, and therefore can assist in diagnoses. Another topic is education, which of course is very controversial because, it's a question of, is AI actually going to degrade our ability for students to learn to think critically and do the sorts of things that they need to be able to do to succeed, even in a future that's dominated by AI. But think of this, think if every single child now has access to an AI agent that can help them learn, that can understand their deficiencies and can be there 24/7 to help them learn. I think it is a very interesting discussion as to how we will learn in the future, with that guiding, not dominant, perhaps dominated, but not completely as part of AI, but rather as AI assistants that help us. So that's the way I like to start to think positively about AI.
In terms of generative AI or Chat GPT, whichever one you want me to talk about, how does one access artificial intelligence through, let's say, Chat GPT? How do you access it?
So simple answer is go to Google, and type in Chat GPT. It will take you to a website. That website is run by a company called OpenAI, which has developed ChatGPT. And you can literally, just like in a Google query, start to use this interface to type in questions and interact with the system. Now, what you may find is that it can be difficult to always get a response from ChatGPT if you're just coming in as a non-paying user. So what OpenAI has done is they've created a paid subscription, it's $20 a month, and that both gives you access to the most recent versions of ChatGPT, and it ensures that indeed your response will be processed promptly.
When you use the phrase open AI, don't feel like you're being in a deposition where a question's given, you give an answer, and then the lawyer asks, although I happen to be a lawyer, a bunch of questions, but what does open AI mean?
So OpenAI is literally the name of the company, those 6 letters. I think it derives from the fact that they open sourced some of the early versions of the code. The more recent versions of ChatGPT are proprietary, primarily for, among other reasons, because Microsoft has made a significant investment in OpenAI. OpenAI, of course, is a private company. And Microsoft, as a result of this investment, is now incorporating ChatGPT into its products, Microsoft Office, into its Bing search engine, and so forth. I should also mention that while we're focused on ChatGPT here, Google has an equivalent capability. It's called Bard, which they are now integrating into, of course, the Google search engine.
That leads to my next question. I was going to ask you, is there competition now in the different potential, I'm going to say sources. I'm not sure if source is the right word, but would you call Chat GPT a source, or what was the word you used to refer to Chat?
I would refer to it as more specifically a generative AI system.
Okay. And so generative AI system is sort of a generic term, right?
Correct. It's a class of systems. And yes, to I think your question is, there is plenty of competition. Not only from Google, but also from internet companies in China, which are developing their own what are called large language models, which is sort of the generic name for the technology under the covers in ChatGPT.
So there are several different, shall we say, generative AI groups that you could get the AI through. My question to you is this. If you ask the question you mentioned before, let's suppose I asked you, I went to generative AI and said, name the starting 5 for the Duke basketball team in 1986, which I could do off the top of my head anyway as a Dookie. But if I asked that question, what would procedurally would happen so that I would get an answer to that question? How does it work?
So let me just real quick start with Google as a search engine, because the way I kind of like to talk about these systems is, since people are familiar and use Google almost on a daily basis, it's kind of useful to start with something people know. So what Google would do is it would parse that query, break it down into words, tokens, do a search of its massive index corpus and find a snippet of text that best addresses what it believes that question is, and then return that snippet of text to you. Okay, so that's, reasonably straightforward. It's quite complex under the covers. OpenAI is very different. They have access to a large volume of content, just like Google, but they process it quite a bit differently. By the way, I should mention that we've been using GBT. That stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. The pre-trained means it's a massive, and I mean massive, model that transforms a query into an answer. And the details of how that is done are considerably different and considerably more complex. And by the way, considerably less understood among the technical community than, say, a Google search. So the answer to the question, Bob, is that it's relatively straightforward to describe what Google does with it, less straightforward to describe how ChatGPT does it, other than a very, very complex model that transforms that question about Duke basketball into that answer, the answer that you well know.
So how do we do the following? You mentioned a foreign country, and I don't want to pick out the name of the country because there's a lot of political discussion about certain countries, et cetera, interacting with the United States. But how do we know if there's a generative AI system that wants to use that system to sort of get a certain philosophy or misinformation on the system? How would one know that? Let's suppose that the foreign country with the generative AI system was not a Carolina fan, and they would want to intentionally put bad information as to who the starting five for Duke was in 1986. What information do we have to back up and know the source of the information that we're getting from the generative AI system?
So that's an excellent question, and a question. What you're asking is kind of a technical question that then permeates the discussion around who owns the content from these systems and so forth. Because to answer your question, right now, there's really no mechanism for knowing exactly what data has been processed to train this massive model that I mentioned that therefore generates the output, which means that different models will give different outputs. And to your point, somebody can control the nature of the content that goes in the training, or possibly in a very sophisticated way, modify that training to give a specific output. And if they, as you're suggesting, desire to make that output what would be viewed as misinformation, they could do so. We should also talk about fake videos, which is a more direct way to do it.
We'll get that in a second.
If I'm allowed to note that the Chinese Communist Party, in fact, is already distributing English-speaking fake videos that are clearly propaganda. So what's happened is that social media, as we know, social media is a beautiful mechanism to spread misinformation. And now you compound that with the ability to generate fake videos. So we are now in a situation where we have both the mechanism, that is social media, other internet phenomena, to spread misinformation that's being generated maliciously, I would suggest, by generative AI. But that's still yet another show.
And by the way, just for those who are dying to know the answer to the question, the starting five was Johnny Dawkins, Tommy Amaker, Mark Lowry, David Henderson, Jay Billis, and Danny Ferry off the bench, just in case you're dying to know the starting five for that team. You have several slides, and there was one slide you had that we talked about last night. I don't know what number it was, where it listed a topic that you asked questions about, and it listed 5 or 6 different responses. I'd like you to show that if you could. I'm not sure what number that is, Rick, because I want to ask you a question about that one. Do you know the slide I'm talking about?
Yeah. So let's, Candy, I think we're at slide 4. If we could bring that up, please.
Yes. Now,
exactly.
it's pretty hard to read that, but there was a question that Rick asked in the generative. I guess you went to Chat GPT, but you got this response, which we really can't see. But what was the question you asked? And then I want to make a comment about the response that you got. What was the question you asked? Do you remember?
Yeah, exactly. So that question is, what is AI and how does it work? And by the way, if I ask this question of Google, I'll get back just a snippet of text, and it's partially useful. But in the case of ChatGPT, it generated this very elegant piece of text. The details are certainly not important here, but I would suggest that the 5 points that are made there are exactly consistent with the way that I would, from a technical perspective, answer this question. So the takeaway message here is that this is novel text, unlike what, of course, is returned by a search engine like Google. That means that if I took this text and pasted it back into Google, it's very unlikely that I'll find an exact match anywhere on the internet. Why? Because that complex algorithm that I keep mentioning has generated this text in response to this specific query.
And Rick, that's exactly my point of the question, because as you said, what the comments listed in this document are irrelevant to us. But my question to you last night when we discussed this was, well, how do I know what the source is of points 1 through 5? So if I want to go into more detail or to verify the accuracy of information, how do I know where to find that? And the answer to my question was, you can tell me the answer because I know what the answer is going to be. What is the answer to the question? How do you verify that those comments 1 through 5 are accurate and what the source is? Can you do that?
This is a big difference between ChatGPT and Google. Google has a very sophisticated algorithm, has to be called PageRank, which ranks pages that are returned as a result of a search query by their authority. It's complicated, looks at the end links to that particular page. ChatGPT, to my knowledge, does not have an equivalent capability to sort of filter misinformation. This information, there are two things that are true. One, to directly answer your question, Bob, is no, we can't produce an autopsy, so to speak, that will determine what text it was that precisely contributed to this. And so therefore it's quite different than Google. We should probably go on and discuss, what if this return were in fact lyrics to a song? So I asked it to generate, say, some country music. I'm going to go after Marsha Blackburn's questioning at the Senate hearing with Sam Altman a couple of months ago. So what if this was actually new lyrics to a song? And guess what? Let's assume maybe those 5 points that are shown there are not, some arcane definition of machine learning and so forth, but in fact are somebody else's lyrics. And now let's just assume that those lyrics, which they likely are copyrighted. That's intellectual property, human creativity that was created by some other musician. And now and let's just say I've taken these 5 different songs and merged them, created a new set of lyrics. Well, this is, again, another show, and you're the lawyer, not me. But you can see immediately that there's a question of, there's at least 5 derivative works here. And the question is not only where did it come from, but who do I pay if indeed I have to pay royalties in order to have used that data to train the model that generated this new song for me?
And Rick,
so let me stop there. That's a mouthful.
A parallel problem that you have in that regard, and we don't need to see that slide anymore, but a parallel problem you have is I practice law. I take great pride in what I do. We write memorandums of law and briefs and those kinds of things. Actually, at my stage in my career, I have other associates younger than me who do those kinds of analysis, and I review and edit the briefs, etc. But there's a lawyer who was not smart enough to do the editing and verify the information, submitted apparently a brief that he got or she got from GPT, and it got sanctioned because the materials on the brief, I think there may have been some citations or whatever that were included, and they were fake cases. And so the lawyer got sanctioned. I'm not sure what level of disciplinary action was taken against him or her, but that's a problem, because how can you rely on information? And our country right now, and this is not a show about politics. When I was on the Board of Education in Richfield, our superintendent of schools, Dr. Wall, said there was a capital P politics and a small p politics. Capital P politics being you're all about political issues, and small p means essentially no matter when you run for office, you're running for political office. The problem is, how do we know that someone's going to not misquote a candidate? How do we know someone's not going to give repeated misinformation, which is a charge against, we now have former President number 45. So these are all issues that we need to discuss as a society. Our House representatives in Washington, D.C. can't decide who their leader is going to be from the Republican Party. How are you going to decide such complex issues? But I want to ask you, Rick, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left in this show. We're going to have many shows coming down the road. If you were to list the 3 or 4 major concerns you have that if you were king, on your King of Today show. But if you were king, if there were 3 or 4 issues you'd like to have the political leaders address, not giving us the answer, but address, what would those be if we're going to try to preserve the use of this technology system that we're available to us, but use it in an appropriate way? Give me 3 or 4 issues that we need to deal with, you think, without the answers necessarily.
Yeah, okay, very good. So I'm going to go slightly beyond that and say that these are what need to be addressed by our entire society, not just political leaders, but scientists as well as legislators. The issue of content ownership that I just alluded to is key. There have already been lawsuits about that. Next question. How will this impact employment opportunities moving forward? We know that a good number of positions are likely to be lost or consolidated due to AI. And the question is, like in other technology transformations in the past, will those jobs then be recaptured as people are retrained to use this technology? Education is a completely different topic. The objective to me is how do you preserve traditional critical thinking, but prepare students for the society that they will see for the rest of their life, namely where they interact with AI. The whole issue of regulation is wide open now, and the European Union's done something. The U.S. is trying to do something. It's hugely complex, and of course, the other discussion that you often hear, and this would be the last point I would mention, is increasingly you start hearing people say, "Well, is AI going to destroy humanity?" And I think that's by the way, is a question that you didn't hear 10 years ago, and you're starting to hear it now. And by the way, you're starting to hear it from people who know a lot about AI. This is not just fear mongering. This is a discussion that we need to have. So let me stop there, Bob. Those are the kinds of things that I think about that I think are worthy of further discussion.
I think those are excellent points you make. And in fact, on the education point, I intend to invite our mutual friend, Susie Da Silva, Superintendent of Schools of Richfield, to talk about the educational issue. I intend to have a doctor with us, perhaps, with the medical issues. But I was thinking, as you raised those points, when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, or when electricity was found, or Samuel Morse and the Morse code, I wonder what society was saying about, gee whiz, all this advancement, how do we deal with it? And I think part of the problem we have in our society is how do we address the fact that if you stay in the same place and don't progress, you're going to end your society. You have to keep progressing. The problem is, how do we address these issues? And we will do so in our next coming shows. We have about 30 seconds left. Rick and Lawrence, I want to thank you very much. It's funny to the audience that we had a topic of about 10 lists of items on the agenda. We probably reached about 1.5 of them because Rick and I could do that. But there's a lot to talk about on artificial intelligence, and there's a lot to talk about the opportunities. We didn't even get into the issue about artificial pictures, which is, I think, I think Dooley is the thing that's cool, but we have a lot to talk about. Rick Lawrence, I will see you again. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in again to The Bobby O Show. And I hope I've made this interesting to you, because you should be looking at the positive, but being aware of the negative. Have a great day. See you, Rick.
Thank you, Bob.